Okay, but to make life a little bit easier, we are going to write a helper function so that it actually implements this logic for the case of logging in a user, okay? So we will write a helper function which is specifically designed to check whether a user is logged in or not. Okay, so to do this, first of all, we're going to import another module. So from web app 2, import cached property, okay? And now this cached property is essentially a wrapper. So we can say cached property def and define a new function. And we will call this function check user logged in. Sorry, check user logged in, all separated with underscores, okay? Okay, so what is a wrapper? A wrapper is a function which evaluates before we get into our function, okay? So if we type in a @ and then cached property, we're actually running the cached property before we run this function here. So it's a nice way of actually, putting essentially this function inside of this function, okay? And why do we need the cached property? Well, the cached property, basically what it does is it makes it remembers the outcome of this function. So we don't need to all the time recalculate the value of this function, okay? So this will be nice and handy because once the user's logged in and we see that they have this cookie, we don't actually go ahead and reevaluate whether the user's logged in. The cached property will remember this, okay? So now we can say if self.request.cookies.get user. So we're going to call the cookie user, okay? Now, why do we need to do this test? Well, imagine that this cookie doesn't exist because it's the first time the user comes onto our site. Well, if we wouldn't run this test, then the second line would create an error, okay? If I say user ID is equal to self.read cookie, and I say user, then I cannot read a cookie that does not exist. So this would throw an error and our application would break. So instead we first need to check if the cookie exists, and if it does exist, we will go ahead and read it. And now we can say if user ID. So if the cookie is valid, we can go ahead and actually create a user object and know that the user is logged in. So we can say first we need to import the user's model. So we can say from models.users import user, and then user is equal to users.getById. GetById, by the way, is a function already defined in the NDB model library, so we don't need to write it. It's a handy way of getting items by ID. And here we simply pass in the user ID. Okay, so now we can go ahead and actually, well, we don't even need to store this in a variable. We can go ahead and just return it. Okay, otherwise, so else, the user is not logged in because we didn't receive anything in the user ID if we're going into this case. So we can simply again return none. And if also we don't receive the cookie, or we cannot identify this cookie, it doesn't exist, we are also going to return a none. So the final thing we need to do is we need to create a wrapper ourselves, because what we will be doing is inside of our login, we will wrap our functions with a function that evaluates whether or not a user is logged in. So in this way, we can not worry about having to implement this code in every single request handler, and we can simply wrap our function to first check, using the function check if the user is logged in, to check whether the user is in fact logged in, and if it is, we will allow them access to this function. If the user isn't logged in, we will not allow access to this function, and we will maybe redirect them back to the login page, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we need to declare this as a static method, and we can say def login underscore required. And since we are designing or we are creating a wrapper is, like I said before, a function that happens before we actually go into the function that we are wrapping around. So we need to pass in a handler, because the handler is going to be the function that we're wrapping around using this login required. Sorry, handler. And now we need to define a function inside of a function. So def check login. And we're going to accept 3 values: self, star asterisk args, and double asterisk keyw args, okay, colon. And now this is just a very Pythonic way of defining a function that can accept any kind of values, okay? So arguments and keyword arguments. And this function is going to be called check login. So if self dot check user logged in colon, we are going to return our handler, providing self because it's our class, and then our args, our asterisk args, and our double asterisk keyword arguments, okay? Else we're going to return a self.redirect to the /login path. Okay, and finally, the first function is going to return check login. Okay, so what's happening here? We have defined a static function, and in this function we are going to pass in a handler, and the handler is going to be this handler here. Okay, so since we're wrapping it around, what actually goes into that function is this handler here. Okay, so that's the parameter going into the function. So then inside of this function, we created another function which we are immediately returning. Okay, this is the way we design wrappers. So we create a function which we are returning, and this function accepts anything. Okay, so arguments and keyword arguments, because we never know what's going to go into this function here. So we have to design the case that accepts all kind of values. Okay, and in this function we are going to say if self.checkUserLoggedIn, which is this function here. So if this returns something, so this is the only case where it can return something, in the case that the user is logged in, we're going to return this handler that we passed in. So this handler here, so we are actually going to go ahead and evaluate this handler. Otherwise, we're going to redirect to the /login screen. Okay,